do you have a kind of measurement for this gender dimension now? How this gender dimension is included in all these projects? Do you have criteria already?
One by one, so I take the difficult questions. So we have to see it in the different stages of the research project cycle. So we start with the programming, where we set out the program for research actions. And there we can measure the number of topics which have a gender dimension in it. For instance, in the work program now we have something in nanotechnologies or in secure societies. Then when it comes to the next stage, which is when the proposals have been submitted based on this work program, the evaluation process. There we need to make sure, and this is also very valid for innovation, that the evaluators have the relevant expertise, because otherwise it would not work. And there we have in our database, we have a huge call for expression of interest, and you are registered as an expert evaluator, a rather important process. Actually, we will fund some 10,000 projects this year with thousands also of evaluators. So it's important that we have the right evaluators there. And then comes the project implementation. And there we have to see how we can measure this without going into too much bureaucracy, putting too much burden on the researchers. And I would think that we should, at some time, after 2 or 3 years, have a dedicated study to look into what have we achieved, what are the next steps, do we need to take corrective measures, or is everything fine?
We're having this afternoon a session on a knowledge exchange forum where participants will be discussing those questions, including a session called What Gets Measured Gets Done. So will the Commission welcome feedback from the sessions? Thank you. So, Daniela.
But there's Einstein saying not everything that matters can be measured. So.
Okay, here. Daniela Corda from the National Research Council of Italy. And actually I have 2 questions. I will start with Dr. Dröll. Now, is it very important to monitor, as you said, the gender in all the phases of the projects, but as we discussed yesterday and many times before, the gender issue is a social issue. And I guess that as Europeans and you as Commission should really work on the member states. I mean, is there anything like that? I mean, to improve the working condition, because at the end, many of the dropping off we have by the PhDs, female PhDs, of course, are due to the non-convenient organization, the bad organization to support the work of families. Thus, Norway, I mean, we are not talking about something we have to invent. I mean, Norway is an extremely good example. And until we will not have that, and, kindergarten, elderly, support for elderly, and so on, if this societal problem will not be solved, I really don't see how the number will increase significantly. And the ERC is a very good example. I mean, we are not seeing an increase there in female applicants. So are you planning or thinking about the society changes that could improve innovation rather than innovation per se? I will ask later to the second question, or should I ask now?
Wow, that's a very big question. Huh? I will not tell you that Europe here, from the powerhouse, we will regulate culture and society throughout Europe.
Recommend.
If you look at the strategic agenda for a union in change, which was adopted last Thursday by our bosses, the heads of states, what we call the European Council. There's one priority for the future of Europe, which is empower society. And I think one of the aspects under this priority is also related to gender equality. We do know, and you're absolutely right, that it is mainly the competence of member states, of national organizations, of Science Europe. We have seen very convincing examples, I find, not only of the problems, but also the solutions step by step to introduce. We have several tools at our hands, but they're all soft tools. We have, for instance, we know that open, transparent, and merit-based recruitment is directly correlated to the innovation performance of an institution. And we measure that, we can benchmark it. That's one aspect. But a European, fully fledged European scheme would not fit. I think we have to take it, because it's too heterogeneous what's happening throughout Europe.
You know, a simple suggestion, if institutions that have a kindergarten would have an extra point in the evaluation, I think they will think about it. Just to... Yes. No, I was very impressed by the figure you showed about UK, where you say that females have a higher success rate in the humanities. And this, I found it as a negative figure, in fact, because you said before that PhDs are 80% female and 70% female and 30% men. That means that having 2/3 of female, then the success rate is about equal. So it's much more for men than for female, if the mathematics goes right, I mean. Because you have more PhDs and the same success rate. So, I mean, have you analyzed that aspect?
Yes, yes, I don't think that's correct. So, effectively what we're showing is that, and the 80% you took there was actually figures from the United States rather than from the UK. But even so, it is true that in the UK as well, we have a higher proportion of women in arts and humanities than we do in men. But the success rates are based on once the number of grants come in, regardless of the absolute number, what is the success rate across those grants. So it effectively controls for the number of grants that are submitted. So whether there's a bias in favour of men or women, success rate is a measure that tells you the success rate overall. So I don't think that's an issue particularly. But let me go back to your first question that you asked of the Commission, and I think there is a much broader issue here, and this is one of the reasons why I talked about research funders having to work closely with the research performing organisations and possibly with other institutions as well. This is not simply about the grants process. This is not simply about whether men or women apply. This is about much deeper, deep-seated issues, of course. And in universities, in the UK at least, in the UK we don't tend to have as many research performers like the Max Planck and CNRS, but what we do have are research performers called universities. They apply for grants and so on. And we know that the promotion criteria, the expectations of academics in the UK are really rather onerous. To succeed as an academic is very, very challenging in the UK. And I think this is one of the things that universities and others have to think very carefully about. We need to move very much towards, and I think there is evidence that we're doing this in the UK, but we need much more to move towards a quality-based threshold for promotion rather than a quantity-based threshold for promotion. And that's regardless of whether we're talking about numbers of grants awarded or numbers of academic papers published in peer-reviewed journals and so on. Quality really has to be the driving force because, of course, any measure that falls down or emphasises quantity is probably going to be to the favour of men than it is to women.
Right, I can see lots of questions, but I would like Londa to advise Science Europe how to link communicating science with gender on the basis of quality of research.
Well, Elizabeth, I think you've caught me off guard. I'm not exactly sure what you're after.
Well, it's the fact that we were talking yesterday about the bias in science. and the way that it is communicated through knowledge, and we all take it at all in, and the bias then creates, we all have a bias in our heads, and because the knowledge is biased itself. This was been remarked on several times, and so if your research councils don't really keep attention about what sort of a knowledge they are funding and not including the gender dimension in it, those things are disconnected, and I think we're not really making much progress. That was my lessons from yesterday.
Right. Well, I thought Peter Dröll, or now I'm getting mixed up, Peter or Paul. Peter Dröll did a very good job of knowing what the Gendered Innovations Project is, and I guess I would encourage Paul to read this book, because it's important that the leaders understand how to reform the knowledge and what needs to be done. We often are looking to get more women into science, but we're cramming them into the same knowledge projects constantly. And if we're really talking about diversity, we're going to have new and exciting, fundamentally new research as well. So I gave some examples yesterday, there are some examples in this book. So I really think we need to push forward the knowledge issue. The European Commission is now, and as I said yesterday, the National Institutes of Medicine in the United States will be pushing this forward for very basic biomedical research. The journals Science and Nature will be asking for appropriate sex and gender analysis when choosing publications for articles for publication. So I think the quality, now the gender will be part of the quality measure, and that's really important.
Yes, maybe I didn't emphasize it enough, and I would hesitate too much from drawing too many conclusions from a diagram with 4 circles and a few lines on it. I mean, there's no question at all that our working groups all collaborate on a whole range of different topics. And I did indeed mention exactly the point that you've just raised, I think, on one of my slides, but I brushed over it very quickly. And it's certainly true that the working group has drawn very serious attention to this issue, thinking not just about how many women succeed and how many don't succeed, but about the science that's done and where it's appropriate to embed that in the research. Yeah, there's no question that the group is already working on that.
There was a question waiting there a long time.
It's a question and a brief comment regarding the presentation on Science Europe strategy. I think one of the things that we, those of us who have been working in the field for many years, and after having heard the discussions of yesterday, I think the challenge is that we have to push the epistemological agenda underlying all this. It's indeed not only about numbers, but we have to change the kind of knowledge that we produce. But to get to that point, we have to be bold and really innovative. And I must say, as much as I appreciated the comment or the response to the question whether there were clear targets formulated to achieve the agenda of Science Europe, there are no clear targets included. I mean, it's all about the process. It's about soft criteria. It's about including experts in the evaluation process. But I think I would rather, as much as I appreciate that, challenge Science Europe to formulate an agenda in bolder terms, in terms of getting indeed more grants and getting more women included in the agenda in the end. Because we all know that if there are no clear targets and no clear monitoring processes, it's very hard to evaluate and really achieve change. So in that respect, I would rather ask Paul Dröll from Science Europe whether it is possible to be more bold and really innovative.
I think I was hinting at that at the end of my talk. One thing you have to bear in mind is that our gender and diversity group has met once. So it's a new working group that's just been established. So I think it would be unrealistic after one meeting for this group to have come up with a set of targets and so on. One of the difficult issues, as you will acknowledge, I think, is that an organisation, and I guess this is an issue for the Commission as well, an organisation like ours represents very, very different behaviour across European countries. We have some examples among our members of extremely well-advanced countries, so Scandinavia in particular, which has clear targets, for example, around quotas and various other things. And we have some countries who, let's be frank, are at the other extreme, who have given much less thought, I think, to gender than perhaps they should have done, and are now starting to learn and improve. And of course, that's one of the real benefits of Science Europe, that we bring together these various countries and agencies to try and bring us up to an equal footing. I think there's an interesting debate, and of course there is a very interesting debate around the issue of whether targets and quotas is the right approach. And looking at the academic literature, there is a debate, and as I said, I drew attention to this recent paper that's come out that I think is quite compelling, that does argue in favour of quotas, but I think there is an evidence base that we have to draw upon and draw together. So while I'm not saying that we will not introduce targets, I think we do have to take this at a reasonable pace. I think it would have been unreasonable of the organisation to introduce a set of targets on day one. I do think we need to learn from each other a little bit. We need to understand why it is that in some countries perhaps these issues have been more difficult to address than in others, and of course are different cultural issues in different countries. But the aim, as you can, I hope, see from the presentation I've given, is that we want to be pushing in the right direction and encouraging all of our members to come together and do that as one. So I wouldn't be surprised that in the future we may well come up with a series of targets, but that's something that we will have to develop and debate as we go forward. So I'm sorry I'm sitting on the fence a little bit, but I think it probably is inevitable given the stage we're at.
Okay, just one more question. Everybody else should come this afternoon to the Knowledge Exchange Forum and we collect all your other comments, please.
Thank you. Anya McKnight from Queen Mary University of London. Yesterday and today we've heard about the disparity between female applicants for ECR grants and their success rate. But there's a two-stage process in those applications, I understand. And my question is, where are the women falling out? Because that would tell you quite a lot about what it is that's going wrong there. The initial process, I believe, just looks at the applicant and their qualifications, and while the second part of the application is the science.
I'm afraid I don't have a very precise answer. Our evaluation criteria are excellence, impact, and implementation. And they apply in all the stages, whether it's in the first stage or in the second. And I don't know, these figures are new. Maybe, Paul, you have some more insights, but I don't know where the break is.
Can I answer? Hello. I'm Isabelle Vernos from the Scientific Council of the ERC, and we have been looking at this data very carefully, and we know that the big drop is the first step of the evaluation. So once they pass the first evaluation, the success rate then is similar to men.
So what you're saying is that women are not getting to the table?
Okay, perhaps I'll reflect on. I mean, so Science Europe, of course, is not involved in the ERC funding at all. That's the European Commission's funding programme, and we fund our own national level programmes. But even so, I think it is very interesting, as we've just heard from the back, that there is this, and the process you described is correct, that there's a two-stage process. And I think this is one of the issues that all funding agencies have to think a little carefully about. One of the things we've, at my own research council, just introduced is a new funding scheme. And this was not to address gender issues. This was to address the problem that traditionally, I think this arguably could be true of ERC as well as the funding schemes that we're responsible for. Traditionally, the funding schemes may be seen to be a little bit too incremental. And traditional peer review sometimes fails to fund the riskiest, most innovative research. So we've introduced a new scheme at my funding agency called a transformative research scheme, and it doesn't use traditional peer review. It uses a totally different approach to fund the grants. I could describe that if you were interested. But the interesting point of that is that the scheme is designed around a completely anonymous process. So all we do is get applications from applicants of ideas, and we assess those ideas without knowing whether it's a man, woman, a more mature research scientist or a more junior research scientist. It's designed to pull out the most exciting ideas regardless of where they come from. That scheme is not something we use across all of our program, and there would be, frankly, quite a lot of practical issues were we to try and introduce it across the whole program, but it is the sort of thing that we might think about as we go forward. Why we need to know the gender of an applicant when applications come in is an important issue. Of course, reviewers and others will sometimes spot applicants, so it's not easy to remove the identity of people, but I think that sort of issue is the type of thing that would be very interesting to discuss as we go forward.